Morning launched the Corruption Perception Index 2017 at a city hotel. What we can tell you from that report is that Kenya has improved its position on the Perception Index, rising by 2 points and 2 positions from 145 in 2016 to 143 in 2017, and this is out of 176 countries. You're probably asking who's at the very top this year. Or better yet, last year, actually this year, New Zealand sit at the top, while at the very bottom are Somalia and South Sudan. The graphics you're seeing on the screen are of 2016. Now, Kenya was at 145, position 145 in 2016. In 2017, up 2 points and up 2 slots to position 143. Joining us in studio to talk a little bit about this is Samuel Kimeo, the Executive Director, Transparency International Kenya. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Many thanks indeed for finding time to be here with us. What do those results mean? What do they tell us about our country? We've risen by 2 points and 2 slots.
Well, I think, Maura, the first point to note is basically to go back maybe 2 years ago and begin to look at the trends. 2 years ago, that's in 2015, we had a score of 25 out of 100, and at position 139 out of 168.
Okay.
Last year, that's 2016, we improved by 1 point. So that meant we had a score of 26 out of 100, but dropped in rank by about 6 points.
To 145.
To 145 out of 176. This year, we have improved 2 points and basically risen on the rank to 143 out of 180. But the bigger picture is that we are still pretty much in the red.
In fact, the question that, I share this information and people asking me, are we worse off? Are we more corrupt? Are we less corrupt? Well, that's what you were getting into, I believe. Yes,
I was just saying that we are pretty much in the red. That improvement of 2 points is still within the margin of error. So statistically, okay, it might not be significant, but what might be important if we can sustain it is the improvement. If we do not go below where we are in terms of especially the scores. We move from 25 to 26 to 28. If next time we find ourselves at 30 and continue to improve, that would be a good picture. But okay, right now, yes, the results, there is that 2 point improvement and an improvement in the rank as well, but we are still pretty much in the red.
There has been a debate, and we've hosted on that same seat the Deputy CEO of the EACC and the CEO of the EACC within the last 3 or 4 months. Yes. They have an issue with perception. They say that perception is relative, and it's a corruption perception index, I believe. Yes. And they say the way you see one thing is different from the way I see it, on the other hand. How do you come up with these numbers when you're telling Kenyans we've risen or we've dropped? How are you calculating where Kenya stands or sits on that particular index?
Well, the Corruption Perception Index is indeed a perception. It is an index that is aggregate. It's aggregated from a number of other indices. And this year for Kenya, we have about 9 sources that we looked at.
So you get your data from 9 sources?
Yes.
And namely, give us examples.
I'll give you some of the examples. We look at the World Bank CPIA. We look at the World Economic Forum study, the Global Inside Country Risk Report, the African Development Bank CPIA, the World Justice Project, and many others. The latest introduction. We also look at the Economic Intelligence Unit and so on and so forth. So we do not go out there to collect primary data.
You don't go to the field and ask Kenyans, do you feel we are...
For the CPI, no. We do that for other studies. Okay. But for the CPI, we don't do that. The CPI basically is an aggregate study.
Okay. Yeah. Where are we in Africa and where are we in East Africa? Have we improved in that? Is corruption... is the perception of corruption in our country lower or higher as compared to East Africa and Africa?
Well, the average score for Africa is 32. That means with a score of 28, we are still below average within the African continent. And I think there are countries that have done much better in Africa than us.
Tell us a bit about them.
I think the highest ranked country in Africa is Botswana at rank 34. Followed by Seychelles at 36, Cape Verde and Rwanda tie at position 48, with a score of 55 out of 100. Then followed by Namibia, Mauritius, and Sao Tome and Principe in that order.
Where East Africa, who are some of the big players in East Africa?
In East Africa, only Rwanda makes it to the top 5 of the African ranking, and within East Africa, Rwanda stands at the top, clearly. Completely out of league with the rest of East African countries. Yeah, some improvement in Tanzania. They still rank better than us. They have a score this time of 36 out of 100. That score is an improvement by 4 points from the last ranking, and they are at 103 out of 100.
That's like what? We're at least 40. Better than us, 40 positions.
Indeed. But in the ranking, we follow them. And then behind us is Uganda and Burundi.
Uganda and Burundi.
Yes.
Some would ask, your study shows or your index shows that Kenya has improved, even if it's minutely. But some would say, we haven't seen big convictions. The list of shame that the president tabled in parliament during his first term was thrown out. How can we have improved? To them, physically, it doesn't make sense.
Well, it probably may not make sense, but statistically, that's what it shows. And I would want to tell you that out of the sources that I have indicated to you, there are particularly 2 sources that showed an improvement. The World Economic Forum index, which is one of the sources for Kenya, shows an improvement of about 7 points. And if you look at the issues that the World Economic Forum study looks at, it looks at issues like, bribes, paying bribes in imports and exports, in public utilities, in annual tax payments, and awarding public contracts and licenses, as well as obtaining favorable judicial decisions. And it's basically looking at how those are vitiated by corruption. And I think from the look of it, 7 points is quite significant statistically. And I would imagine that in one of these areas, or more of these areas, we would have improved.
Some would ask, what was the impact, if any, of the election, of 2 elections, on this study? Would that have affected this in any way?
Well, I would imagine that this would come up in the study for this year.
Okay.
But if I may just go back and refer to the East African Bribery Index that we released early last year. And at that point in time, we had asked Kenyans a particular question, again about perception, whether they thought that corruption was going to increase during the year or not. And interestingly, a very big percentage said that corruption was going to increase. In fact, we're talking of more than 80% of Kenyans saying that corruption was going to increase. But what was interesting was the reason they gave, because over 40% of them said it's an election year. We have an election coming up. So in the minds of Kenyans, and perhaps in their own experiences, our corruption as well as elections are very closely related. And it goes to the point that many have always made, that corruption drives our elections, and our election drive corruption. So there's a very symbiotic relationship between the pursuit of political office and corruption in this country.
Okay. Finally, you have in the past been on record for saying that the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, and you can tell me if I've misquoted you, the Department of Public Prosecution, the judiciary, all bear collective responsibility for high corruption levels in the country. And you said that, I think it was a year or 2 ago. Can we say the case is the same today, that the only way we'll see an improvement in these rankings is unless these bodies all move, either change how they're operating, have a greater sense of urgency with how they deal with corruption, and of course, plus all Kenyans as well? Would you say that that would cause a change that we could rise to 100 maybe?
I would say yes. There's more that these institutions need to do. And I want to also acknowledge that that was my position. It's still my position up to today. The only credit I would give to all these institutions is that looking at them, you see maybe a greater commitment, better methods of trying to address the issues, and of course, as a result, you see some minute positive results, would I say. Last year alone, I am aware that 22 criminal cases were concluded
Out of a very large number, though.
Out of a very large number. And out of those 22, I am told 18 of them ended up in convictions. Those are small numbers, but if you go back 3, 5, 10 years ago, that is a huge improvement in terms of numbers.
We would see 1 or 2 convictions at most.
So when we get to a level where we can say we have 500 cases that have been determined, and that 400 or 500 of them have resulted in convictions, and that the properties that are the subject of these cases have been recovered and taken back to the public, then we'll definitely see a big leap in the ranking in terms of score.
Okay. I feel like there's so much we needed to talk about. 30 seconds, your thoughts on corruption at the counties. I've hosted several governors here, and 1 or 2 of them are new, and each of them are talking about how they are trying to chase either ghost workers that were registered under the previous regime, or ghost projects that are in the county books. Money has been paid for them, but on the ground they don't exist. Let me get your thoughts on corruption at the county.
Well, it's an issue. We have a problem of accountability at that level. In the last 5 years that devolution has been in place, we clearly have seen a lot of gaps where money is lost corruptly, and partly also at the initial stages because of lack of capacity. So things are not done the way they are supposed to be done because people who are in place do not have the capacity. So they are very interrelated issues, because our own leaders at that level have the leeway to engage people who have the know-how, and we have no shortage of people who have the know-how on how things are going to be done. And then we also need to have a zero tolerance to corruption at that level. Unfortunately, there are too many cases that citizens will tell you about, but the accountability levels are pretty low. And because of the numbers and the prevalence of it, there are many of them who can sit back pretty and say that, you know, they'll never catch up. We'll never be held to account for it.
Will never be held to account for it. Thank you so much. That's Samuel Kimeo, Executive Director, Transparency International Kenya, sharing a report that they've just released on the Corruption Perception Index, where Kenya falls in and on, in that, and some of the reasons behind that, and how they came up with this index, how they did that calculation. Thank you so much for finding time to be here with us.
Thank you.
All right, we continue to focus on the LSK elections, and throughout the course of